What's happening, folks? Back with another reaction, back with some more Japan, and we're returning to the 1978 album Adolescent Sex. And the next tune of the playlist is Communist China, which almost feels like a reply or the other side of a reaction I did from Ultravox a couple weeks ago, which was White China. Now, people pointed out when I did that reaction, which as I heard the song, I took to be related to the Kuomintang and the nationalist China communist civil war, which led to the creation of the PRC eventually, and obviously the political tenor and characteristics of China changed dramatically, and that continues into the present, although with, let's say, more technological development. But yes, people pointed out then that that tune may relate more directly or more specifically to the return of Hong Kong to PRC control after being a British colony for many years before that. But again, this seems almost like the opposite side of the spectrum in relation to 20th century Chinese history. So yes, Communist China, it feels a direct reference to the People's Republic of China, which is a long and complicated story as a historian who actually took a course related to Chinese history, which we began, it was like late 19th century up through the 21st century. So, yes, it covered far more than just Communist China. But there's no way to talk about the last century or so of Chinese history and not talk about the PRC. And of course, you can speak to the authoritarian, indeed totalitarian nature of the regime, the one-party system, the intense censorship which is placed on free expression and artistic expression, indeed movies and television shows and music has to go through these like bureaus of evaluation where they get either rejected for public release or acceptance, and there must be certain pro-state considerations. Now, of course, the PRC is not exclusive in terms of government censorship or the suppression of alternative points of view, but it is perhaps a very concentrated and blatant case of that type of political atmosphere. And certainly in the first couple decades after the creation of the PRC, the stark contrast with the much more right-leaning government that was in place before that, which then became the government of Taiwan, is quite notable. So yes, I don't quite know what to expect here other than maybe some direct references to the first couple decades of the PRC and what that might have been perceived as from, a Western perspective. So yeah, ultimately I wonder if there's some narrative on a smaller scale with Communist China as a backdrop, but let's see what we can pick up. And I suppose it's fair to say that a band named Japan, which during the civil war of China was ultimately engaged in its own imperial endeavors, and then after World War II would sort of come into the zone of American/Western influence. So I feel like any of these topics could be relevant, and though I don't necessarily expect Japan as a nation state to factor into this, it is the name of the band, so a track like Communist China, it's hard not to make that suggestion. So in any case, I'll see what I can pick up on a first listen. This is Communist China by Japan, and it's from the 1978 album Adolescent Sex.
Communist China, tell me heaven, somebody wrong. What's the cause in your face, calling me propaganda still? We've been waiting for so long. tell heaven, oh, somebody wrong. Oh, what's a glass in your face, calling new propaganda still? We've been waiting for so long. Personal problems for you. And conversations getting far too vicious. Impersonations won't do. Communist China. I'll tell heaven, somebody wrong. I want a glass in your face, say it's new propaganda. We've been waiting for.
Wow. Okay, so yeah, lyrically, I don't really know what's happening, but we do hear concepts like confrontation, resistance, propaganda. So I feel like there are some political overtones here, but maybe they're just sort of eccentrically referenced and there's not any clear narrative. I don't know if it's making a, socio-political point. It doesn't feel like there's a direct statement in that regard. But I guess it's fair to say I didn't mention, like the PRC, perhaps as much as any other 20th century nation, was very intensive in its use of propaganda imagery, like propaganda posters, which many of you have probably seen them. They have this strong proletariat type of appeal, which is to say they often show like factory workers or agricultural workers, simple folk, but getting things done, looking happy, supporting the political leadership. Of course, there is an irony there in that the influence of your everyday factory worker or farmer in China, certainly in the first few decades, and to a lesser extent even now, was incredibly minimal, if tangible at all. The political leadership was a very select few, often related to military leadership from the very earliest phase. But yes, ultimately the propaganda posters were part of the state-sponsored messaging system, if you will. So maybe it's a direct reference to those propaganda posters and campaigns. Of course, when I think of resistance in communist China, you're inclined to think of something like the Tiananmen Square protests, which are still 10 years in the future at the time of this song. So, obviously not a direct reference there, but certainly there was resistance and, what's the right word? Oppression or crackdowns on resistance prior to that quite famous event or series of events. But yes, I don't know, again, what else to make of it. The track itself is like this very eccentric piece, kind of reminds me of like a Roxy Music track where, rhythmically it keeps shifting and there's some melodic, maybe not dissonance, but eccentricity or eclectic sound to it. It's, not like a simple, catchy melody that you're going to find yourself humming, but it just has this, bizarre type of feel to it. And I, again, hear the sort of youthful and sneering type of vocal delivery from Sylvian, which I didn't quite, I wasn't thinking about it when I started reacting to this album, but yes, Mark and others have pointed out that they were very young at this point, so, part of their sound musically and part of his sound vocally is simply, a youthful, maybe, trying to be a bit outside the lines or being a bit counterculture in their stylings, not so much like it's the only voice he was capable of, but it was sort of an outgrowth of their youthful approach to the album, in contrast to maybe their more artful or mature or sophisticated sound a few years and a couple albums later. In any case, a really interesting track. I apologize for the history quasi-digression at the beginning of the video. In any case, let me know what you think. I will see you next time. Peace.